Well, hello everybody. Drew Duran here with Drew Duran Fly Fishing, and this is a video that I've had in my mind for years now. It's something that I've wanted to do because I don't think it's talked about enough in the industry, but how much should you tip your guide? What's a customary tip? Can you base your tip on how the performance of the day went? And as a guide, as a professional in the industry, I want to talk about what your tip means to me so that you can kind of see it from the other side, where your tip goes and how much the costs of the trip are. And there are also different kinds of tips depending on whether a guide works for an outfitter or whether a guide is independent, because there are so many different things that factor in to how much to tip your guide. So let's get started. So first things first, this has nothing to do with my clients lately and how much they've been tipping. This isn't to get you to tip more or to make you feel bad at all. This is something that I'm separating from my guide service and something that I'm doing for the general public. So I've been more than happy with my tips. For me, tips are icing on the cake. So anything that you give at the end of the day is appreciated, much appreciated. So the first thing to talk about, I think, is that not all guides are created equal. And what I mean by that is I'm an independent guide on the San Juan. I've been there for 20 years, and I've never had to work for anybody. But that means that for the first couple of seasons, I starved because I didn't have clients. I didn't have a outfitter or some lodge booking trips for me. I had to book every trip on my own and garner all these clients on my own. And that meant that it took a long time for my business to get started. But it also meant that when I collected, this was like $265 a day back then in 2002, 2003. When I collected that $265 was all mine as an independent guide. I had to pay taxes and, of course, pay for my guide license and my expenses, but I didn't have to pay for an outfitter. I didn't have to give them a percentage of my day. And that's huge because fast forward to today where let's use $500 as a amount that people are charging on the San Juan River. Let's say an outfitter charges you $500 for a day. You go out with one of their guides. Well, chances are that guide isn't getting the whole 500, not even close. So chances are the guide might be only getting out of $500 maybe 60%. So it's a 60-40 split. So let's say they're getting $300 out of the $500 and $200 is automatically going to the outfitter. Now, there's nothing inherently unfair about that because the outfitters sometimes provide boats, they provide the guide license, the insurance, all the advertising, the booking. I mean, they take care of a lot of different things. And in some states, in a lot of states, you can't work independently. You have to work for an outfitter. So it's important for you to understand that when you are tipping a guide who works for an outfitter, that money is going straight to the guide and not to the outfitter. So if you pay the outfitter $500 for the day, the guide is only getting like $285 to $300 of it. $200 is automatically gone. So the tip that you tip your guide helps to offset their costs because a lot of times outfitters aren't providing flies, leaders, tippets, strike indicators, gas, shuttle fees, all of these things. So the $100 tip, the $150 tip, whatever you decide, is going towards the guide himself or herself, not towards the outfitter. That's huge. That is like a difference of a waitress who's getting paid $2.10 an hour, and your tip is really paying for their wage on the states that do that, as opposed to a waitress or a waiter that's getting minimum wage, and then your tip is sort of supplementing their income. Guides who work for an outfitter are like the waitresses or waiters that are getting tipped as part of their income. So it's important for them to use those tips to survive as income. Another thing to consider, of course, are the expenses that go along with a guided trip. So you go and pay someone for making your latte. It literally takes them 2 minutes to make your coffee. If the coffee's great, they flip the screen around and you can give them a tip of $1, $1.50. Some people tip $2, $3. So that equates to almost 40-50% of your coffee. That's for 2 minutes of work. The cup isn't theirs, the coffee isn't theirs, none of that expense that the person incurred at Starbucks to make your coffee is theirs. So the entire $2 tip goes to them, to the team. When a guide takes you out, he or her has to have the gas to get there, to pick you up, to go to the river. Usually that's, let's say, $25 in this economy. $20 to $25 of gas. Then they have a shuttle fee, usually if it's a float trip, and shuttles have gone through the roof as far as with inflation and how much gas costs. So an average shuttle right now, I bet you, is $40. And some places in Montana, Utah, Colorado are more than that. So let's say an average of $40 for the shuttle. So we're up to $60 already, $65 in costs. And then you have flies. It's nothing on, there's no problem with the client, but inevitably you're going to lose flies. You're going to get snagged on the bottom. You're going to get tangled. Things are going to get messed up. So flies, I'd say if I get off the river with losing less than a dozen flies, it's been a good day. So a dozen flies is going to cost about $30 to $40. And then a leader could be what, $6 nowadays. Strike indicator, another $2. And these are for the guides that will rig your rod and leave all that rigged. Of course, if they have their own rods, then they're getting some of that stuff back at the end of the day. And then we haven't even talked about lunches or drinks, which in this economy, you go to the grocery store and it's a super expensive. Everybody understands what that's like. And I'd say $60 to $80 a day on a good lunch, complete lunch, between drinks, dessert, sandwiches, paper plates, hand sanitizer, napkins, everything that should be in a guide lunch. So you add it all up and you're already over $100 easily in expenses for a guide for the day. If this guide is an independent guide like me, then those expenses kind of get offset on the guide fee. So the tip can be icing on the cake. If a guide works for an outfitter and he or she is providing all of these things for you, then that's going to come out of their pocket. And remember that 60-40 split, 70-30 split, where their expenses are coming straight out of their pocket. So any tip that you pay them helps to offset those expenses so that the payment from the outfitter can go directly towards their living expenses. I know it seems like guide trips are expensive, and they're getting too expensive, in my opinion. I mean, I'd like for everybody to be able to take a guide trip with me, and now it's getting to a point where you have to be sort of at this level to be able to take a guide trip. But no guide is getting ultra rich being a guide. We do it because we love it, because we genuinely have a passion for it. The seasons are short. You bust your ass for a certain period of time. Sometimes you work 20 days in a row if you have to. And nobody's really getting rich. It's a good living. We appreciate it. It's not like we're starving, but it's not like we're getting rich off of the guide fees or the tips. So there's always that to consider. So then, what is the baseline tip? And I'm going to use $600 as a guide fee because on the San Juan, for instance, they're a little bit less, but in Montana, they're a lot more. So let's use $600 for 2 people for a full day float trip. So if you're paying $600 percentage-wise, what's the baseline tip? And this is assuming that the guide showed up on time, the guide changed your flies out, set up your rod, landed your fish, took pictures, provided a good lunch, had a good conversation, and had a good, 7 hours, 8 hours of fishing time for you. Notice I didn't say anything about numbers of fish. And that's because your experience or your tip, your guide trip should have nothing to do with how many fish you catch. Sure, you don't want to get skunked. Sure, there are guides who don't work hard enough to get people into fish, and that's our goal. Believe me, a good guide is only thinking about getting you into fish and doing whatever it takes to get you into fish. But that's not the arbiter. That's not the judgment of what makes a good guide trip. Not fish numbers aren't what makes a good guide trip. Did you have fun? Do you have memories that last a lifetime? Did you learn anything? Did your time on the river, did you learn something different about the area and specific about the flora and the fauna? All of those things are what make a good guide trip. So let's say you get through the guide trip and you've had a good day and it's $600. Percentage wise, I think 20% is a good baseline on how much to tip. So that would make it like $100 to $125. That's if everything went well. $125. I'm talking about for both people. So that would be what, $65 a piece, $50 to $60 a person as far as a tip goes. So $100 to $125 per boat. I think that's a good baseline. Anything less than that, and it seems like, from a guide's perspective, it can seem like, what did I do wrong? Or it can seem like they don't really know what's customary to tip. And that's the whole reason why I'm doing this video, because the times when I can think back when I've been stiffed, I don't think it's because I didn't do a good job. I think it's because the people don't understand that a tip is part of a guide trip. I think that as a guide, when I get that tip, I appreciate it a lot. So it's $100 to $125. And it makes me feel like you appreciated the work that I did and that I did a good job. And as a guide, you're thinking automatically, and I'm just going to be honest with you about things, because if I bullshit people, it's not going to help them any. If it's $125 tip, $150 tip, you automatically put that into your mind as, I want them to book again. So let's say you have prime time. You have June on the San Juan when everything's perfect. Best time of the year to fish. You have, what, like 3 weeks of prime? You're going to email, text, call these people and say, hey, do you want to come out and fish with me? It's prime time. Maybe that fall's going to happen. Something special, because you know not only that they're a good tipper, but they appreciate your work and that you appreciate them, so that you automatically go into a different category in a guide's mind. So we really appreciate it. That helps to offset our costs, but also it sort of feels customary if the guide, again, if the guide did a good job. Now let's talk about what happens if the guide doesn't do his or her job. And this happens more often than you would think. If you're new to a guide trip, you may not even understand. But if you've taken guide trips before, then you understand that not all guides are created equal. Let's say they show up late, they spend a lot of time getting their stuff rigged, they drop you off at the boat and then take forever, smoke some cigarettes, on the way down, and then don't change out your rigs, don't really talk much, they don't have this personable feeling. If at any point in the guide trip you feel like the guide is working, that they're just going through the motions and doing what they have to do to get the day over so that they can get paid, then that guide is not doing his or her best job. Sorry to say it, but it's true. I've been guiding for 10 seasons. I've been on the river for 20 years, thousands and thousands of days, and I never feel like it's a job. It always feels like a privilege to be out there with you. It always feels like I have the best job in the world, the best office in the world. So why would I ever want to complain about it? And you can see that when I go out with clients, because we're always laughing, we're always having a good time. There's so much more to being a good guide than just getting your people on fish. So and you know what I'm talking about, you can tell when a waitress or a server isn't doing their job as well as they should be. If there's a guide that's doing this, then I think it's totally acceptable to lower your tip depending on their effort for the day. Just like you would up the tip if somebody went above and beyond, I think it's perfectly acceptable to lower the tip. And I would tell them too. I would tell them, I'm tipping you $50, $25 a person, and this is why. And that's just who I am, because I'm not doing them any good if I just give them $50 and then snub and they think it's part of my personality. No, it's not part of my personality. This is why I gave you a less tip than I would have normally, because this is what happened. And there's all this sort of judgment there, and people can be cheap and look for reasons to lower their tip, but you be honest with yourself about how the experience was. I think it's totally acceptable to lower your tip and be honest about what you expect in a guide trip and how those expectations weren't met, And it better not be an expectation of like, I thought we'd catch 50 fish today and we only caught 25, because you're the type of client that no guide wants to have in their boat, because it's not just about fish numbers. If you bring a counter on a guide boat and you're counting fish and that's how you judge the success of your day, then you're wrong. Then you probably need to take up another sport, because there's way more about fly fishing. But let's say a guide goes out of their way. So they show up, the fishing's better in the morning, so they show up at 7:30 in the morning. But then the fishing's better, there's a little bit of lull from 3 to 5, so they're going to fish you from 5 to 7 also. So they're putting in a 10 to 12-hour day by the time they get you back to the lodge and drop you off.
See?
And they've switched flies out, the conversation's been good, you've learned a lot, and the lunch is good, and they haven't complained or made it feel bad. I have a bunch of experiences of clients who come with me and say, well, this is what happened on another guide trip, and you'd be surprised at the stories that I hear. But if the guide goes out of their way, and there are a lot of guides who do this, and gives you a good day, one of the days that you'll remember for the rest of your life, I think like $150 to $200 is easily acceptable for a tip, because you have to remember, it's not about money. To me, it's about showing your appreciation. It's a way of showing your appreciation. Like, I appreciate the money. Maybe that's good because I'll get to buy my daughter something, go on a trip. That it adds to my life. But it also shows me that you appreciate the work that I put in to the guide trip. So it's perfectly acceptable on the other range, the other side of the scale, to up your tip depending on how hard the guide worked for you. So you don't want to just tip $100, $125 with any level of experience that you've had. You can lower that or give it more, but let's say $100, $125 is a good baseline of a tip. And of course, no video about tipping would be complete without a guide telling you stories about their best tipping experience and their worst. So let's start with the best so that we can end on a note where you can all comment down about how crappy it was and what experience for the worst tipper. But my best tipping experience was $250, and this was when I was charging $300 a day, so it's almost 100% of the guide fee. So I go out with this father and son, and they were from Jordan, Syria, somewhere in the Middle East. Great people, and they had been on vacation in Durango, and they just wanted to do something different as a father and son bonding experience. So they said, hey, let's go fly fishing. They had never fly fished before. They had never heard about fly fishing. I got him in the boat and we went down, and the son caught a couple of fish. The dad caught a couple of fish, but mostly they learned about the experience of fly fishing. They learned about New Mexico, about some of the indigenous people, about the sandstone cliffs, all of this stuff that I gave them as a tour guide because I knew they had never been to that part of the country. So at about 12:30, 1 o'clock, we have lunch, and then the dad says, I think we're done, my friend. And I said, what? Yeah, we'll keep floating down. We have another 4 or 5 hours. He's all, no, we're done, my friend. We had a great time. There's nothing that could add to this for me. My son has caught some fish. We got some pictures. We can float down to the bottom. And me as a guide who busts his ass for clients, that just was like, wow, did I do something wrong? Or it's weird for me to end my days early, but of course I'm going to do what the client wants to do. We rode down to the bottom, and then I was expecting, a smaller tip because I didn't work as hard. Well, he gives me the $300 and then $250 extra, so it was almost 100% tip. Really blew me away. One, because you don't judge a book by its cover. You don't say, oh yeah, they're going to be big tippers or they're not going to be big tippers, because I guarantee you the blue collar dude who's a mechanic and he and his buddy saved up all year for this trip, they're going to tip you more than the doctor or the CEO who comes and flaunts their Sage R8 or their new Winston rod and Orvis waders and then tips, 10%, 15%. So it was a beautiful day because What I did was give them an experience, and what they did was show me appreciation for the entire experience. And it was just a great experience. Blew my mind. $250 tip. The cheapest tip, and I've been stiffed before. Don't believe that I haven't been had guide trips where I didn't get a single tip at all. But I think that's because the people didn't understand about tipping, or maybe, and I've seen this where they've saved up all this money for a guide trip, and $500, $350 back then was a lot of money, and they couldn't. It was really stretching it for the trip to add another $100 on, and that's okay with me. But we get down, and I'm the type of guide again. I'm an independent guide, so I can fish whatever. I don't have to get off the river at 4, at 3:30, like most people do. We fished all day, and then we get off near dark, and the person gives me a $20 bill. And granted, nothing had gone wrong with this trip, but our personalities were okay. They caught tons of fish. I don't know why. There was nothing indicative in the trip that would justify giving me a $20 tip. But for whatever reason, they gave me a $20 tip. So I was probably like 20 days in on a stretch. So I went up to them and I gave them the $20 back. And they said, well, what's this for? And I said, here, you obviously need this more than I do. And that was kind of me, as mad as I get. And people who know me know it takes a whole lot to get me mad. But that was me saying, like, I would rather you not tip me at all than to give me a $20 tip that is, to me, an insult. Don't insult me by giving me a $20 tip on a $300 trip, because I'd rather have you not give me anything. And I don't need your money. If that's how you feel about the trip, if that's what you feel my appreciation level was, how much you appreciate me, then I don't need it. I don't need your money, and chances are I'm not going to ever have you as a client again, and that's okay with me. So it sounds harsh, but it's just being honest with you about experiences like that. And it's few and far between. I have hardly ever had bad experiences as a guide. I know it's hard to think of, but it's probably because of my attitude. So that would just happen to be one of the bad stories about guiding careers. But so I hope this helps dispel some of the myths about tipping, sort of gives you an idea of how much to tip when you go on a guide trip. It's good to use percentages, because a guide trip on the San Juan's like $500 a day for 2 people. In Montana, they're getting up to $750, $800. So it's not going to be a set level of $100 per boat. It kind of depends on how much you're paying for the guide trip. Also, some guide trips are more inclusive than others. I mean, some guide trips include more things. There's private water, there's salt, where you have a lot more expense for the guide. So not all guide trips are created equal, but 20% is a good guideline to go through. And I don't mind that people are getting a lot better about this, but they'll ask me, like, what's customary tip? How much of a tip should I give? And I'm not bashful about telling them that, $100 is baseline. It totally depends on you, but I appreciate anything that you give me. So what that means is that communicate with your guide. Communicate with him or her about what you want to get out of the trip in the beginning when you show up. Communicate in the middle if something's not going right, or if you want to do something different. You want to throw dry streamers if you want to experience a different part of the river. And then at the end of the guide trip, communicate about what you liked, about what you didn't like, and communicate about the tip if you're ever unsure. A guide is not going to be offended if you ask them how much is customary for a tip. It might vary in a different area, but having a good communication with your guide can go a long way to making the whole day, not just the tipping experience, but the whole day, as good as possible. So I hope you get the experience of having a guided trip. I hope this helps if you do get a guided trip. And I hope more than anything that you can just get out there. The weather's getting warm, and it's about time to get fishing.